Now I've got the intro for Guilty Feminist stuck in my head.
Just
We fried my
kind of
brain.
ruined you for this intro, bud.
I never had a problem before, and then we tried to like mainstream
script it.
to script it, and now
Yeah.
I can't do it.
My bad.
Rightio, let's see if we can get this. Welcome to 2Girls1GarbageCan, the podcast where we explore the garbage can state of the Australian political system using a historical lens to try and make sense of the trash fire that we are dealing with. I am your host, Tamara.
And my name is Matty. And Tamara's got something for us this week. Now, we're talking politics of the past and how it impacts and influences today.
Yes. I'm going to start with a lovely little tale. Are we ready for today's edition of the Garbage Can?
Let's do it. I want to go dumpster diving today. Let's go.
Okay. The Petriana was a screw steamer powered by both steam and sail. It was owned by the Asiatic Petroleum Company and operating on behalf of the Shell Transport and Trading Company. The Petriana was bound for Melbourne, Victoria from Borneo. It was laden with 1,300 tonnes of bulk oil, as well as an unrecorded quantity of naphtha and benzene. It left Balikpapan in the Dutch East Indies with 1,300 tonnes of petroleum for the Australian market, travelling to Melbourne via Sydney. It had a crew of 27, 16 Chinese and 11 Malay, while the 9 others on board were British. On the morning of the 28th of November 1903, Petriana was boarded by Henry Press, a pilot of 20 years' experience who was to guide the ship through the heads into Port Phillip Bay. The pilot boarded the vessel at 6 a.m. and proceeded toward the notorious rip at the entrance of Port Phillip Bay. The fog was thick and the shoreline was obscured, but the pilot hoped the fog would clear by the time the leading lights could be seen. Unfortunately, the fog did not clear, and the Petriana went aground on Portsea Back Beach at 7 a.m. Within moments, the engine room and stokehold were flooded, leaving the vessel without power. Attempts made to refloat the Petriana throughout the day using the steam tug James Patterson were unsuccessful. The following day, the salvage schooner Enterprise and the tug the Eagle were called to assist. It was hoped that the powerful pumps on the Enterprise could remove some of the water from the Petriana, allowing her to refloat. However, both pumps broke down, so this effort was abandoned. The next strategy was to lighten the vessel by releasing the cargo of 1,300 tonnes of oil into the sea. In a time before modern-day environmental concerns, though at the time there were many and there was outcry about this, the spill was described as a film of great beauty radiating all the colours of the rainbow spread from the Sorrento Back Beach to Point Nepean. The foul-smelling oil contaminated the beaches for months afterwards. A final attempt was made on Monday the 30th of November 1903 by James Patterson, but by this stage the ship was so badly damaged that it was formally abandoned. The master of the ship, Captain Kerr, and his wife, 6 officers, and the cabin boy had been evacuated after the first attempt to refloat the vessel. The 27 crew had also been evacuated, but the crew, who were of Chinese and Malay descent, sparked a national controversy. Victorian authorities tried to prevent the seamen from landing in line with the Immigration Restriction Act, the White Australia policy, which prohibited immigrants not of European descent from entering the Commonwealth.
Okay, I have to say it. The second you said the 27 crew of Chinese and Malay descent, I was like, this gonna be some White Australia policy shit in it. And sure enough, I am very rarely disappointed. Oh boy. Yes, historical legalized racism. Let's go. What a topic.
Today, we are going to be talking about the White Australia policy, yes.
Excellent. If you didn't do it, I was going to.
As if I'd let you beat me to it. Fuck off. Once the Patriana was formally abandoned 2 days after the spill, the crew was sent to Hong Kong aboard a Japanese steamer. They had to wait for 2 days aboard life rafts as the Australian public argued about whether or not they should be allowed to come aboard Australian shores. The Australian Prime Minister at the time, Alfred Deakin, backed up the local authorities, and the debate raged in the press for months, with letters variously of protest, explanation, or apology. Captain Kerr, who'd been the captain of the Petriana, wrote, "If this treatment of my crew is a fair specimen of your humanity, it is about equal to the worst barbarity of other nations. And if it is forced on you by your laws, I regret to say they are a disgrace to the British Empire." Imagine being so
getting
racist.
schooled on racism by the British.
Imagine being so
like,
racist the British are embarrassed by you.
Yeah, British person rocks up. I say, you are terribly racist, and that's coming from me.
This is far too racist for my tastes, and I'm British.
I'm so shocked I spilled my tea.
The wreck of the Patriana still lies in shallow waters in pieces around 200 metres off the point of Nepean. The White Australia policy, while no longer forming a central piece of Australian immigration law, still makes up the foundation of our immigration law today, and we can still see it reflected throughout time in policies such as the Pacific Solution, children overboard scandals, and, of course, offshore detention processing, which has been declared a humanitarian crisis several times by the UN, to which our Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, his response was to say that, like most Australians, he was just sick of being lectured to by the UN. On the evening of the wreck, the James Patterson took those rescued from the Patriana to Queenscliff. The ship's captain, William Kerr, and his wife were passed through quarantine and then given accommodation in town. However, the other officers and crew, who were of Chinese and Malay descent, were required to remain on the tug. Initially, it had been explained to them that they would be needed for the recovery attempts, though this was simply some subterfuge given to stop them from kicking up too much of a fuss.
Yeah.
Once the ship had been formally abandoned, immigration officials applied the Immigration Restriction Act of 1901, refusing permission for the Asian crew members to land and forcing the tug to anchor off Williamstown, where it remained until a Japanese mail steamer bound for Hong Kong decided to stop by and pick them up so they wouldn't be left there. Captain Kerr also said, "I've sailed in many seas the world over, but have never before seen or heard of a country where the shipwrecked mariner was not allowed to set his foot on dry land." So, he obviously very, very upset by this. But this was probably the first real attempt of the White Australia policy to be tested. So in the 1800s, the majority of the white population of the Australian colonies shared attitudes towards people of different races that, by today's standard, we would call openly racist. Criticisms of non-white groups were based on the idea that they were less advanced than white peoples in all ways, but especially morally. In Australia, this idea... It's terrible.
I'm biting the fuck out of my tongue so you can get the words out.
I'm trying to get past it as quickly as I can because I'm just like, holy shit. In Australia, the idea was particularly focused on people of Asian descent, but it did apply to all non-whites, including Indigenous Australians, considered a dying race. Yeah. Ironically, Australia of the day saw itself as a utopia and a working man's paradise, a forward-thinking country that promoted equal rights and opportunities for desirable citizens. Of course.
Ah, yes. Equal rights for a certain group.
Yes.
Yeah.
The nation aimed to attract a well-paid male, white and skilled labour force to uphold this image. So that meant that non-whites and even some working women were seen as a threat to this ideal. They were perceived as being inferior, and this meant that they were paid less. And it was believed that they would just steal employment opportunities, which is a rhetoric that we still hear repeated a lot.
They took our jobs.
The lazy immigrant come to steal our jobs.
Yeah, the lazy immigrant who's working in the job that I specifically don't want.
Yeah. That they couldn't get anyone else to do. They had to import people to do the job that I didn't want to do, and I'm now going to complain that it's not there for me to do it.
Yes, the immigrant from overseas with 5 degrees has taken the job of you, Harry, the toothless wonder who didn't even pass
driving an
high school.
Uber.
Yeah.
Driving an Uber because we won't let them work as a doctor.
Yeah, which they're more than qualified
Absolutely.
for and probably better than most of ours.
But we're too racist to let them do it. Oh,
Yeah,
guys, if you can't afford to go and see a GP, just ask your next Uber driver. They'll probably be able to help.
I hate that that's probably more true than the joke makes it out to be. Like, I hate that. That has me feeling a certain way tomorrow. I think I'll get a second opinion from my DD driver.
DD driver.
The DD stands for Dr. Driver.
Yeah. God. Oh, God. That's probably where they got the idea
Driving
from.
doctors. Like,
DD probably means doctor in another language. They're just another culture's literally laughing at us. Yeah. Call a doctor and pay them to drive you to Macca's instead of getting health care. It's called capitalism. So later on, I do want to go through some facts about immigration just because these lies still persist to this day, and it is ridiculous that we still believe some bullshit taught over 170 years ago when we know that it's false. Like, we got the facts to prove it's not true. Oh, God. So prior to 1901, the Australian colonies had seen a large growth in non-white migration, especially during the gold rushes in many settlements across Australia from on both the east and west coast. Reactions of white Australians to this trend were overwhelmingly negative, and because this was happening on both coasts, it was shared nationally. It was a national sentiment. The tension was further aggravated by the introduction of indentured Pacific Island labour to Australia. So
the slavery of Pacific Islanders, for anybody who doesn't quite get that terminology.
Anyone who wants to know, whenever you hear indentured labour, talking about brown people, it's when the white people want to pretend they weren't doing slavery. That's how we whitewash history.
We paid them, technically.
Well, they were in debt, and we let them work their debt off.
They didn't have a choice but to work for us.
Yeah. So they came from a tribe where they shared, and we gave them tobacco, and they gave us cloth. And we said, oh, thank you for the cloth, but the tobacco actually cost £500. Do you have £500? No, well, you have to come work for us now. And they went, but we have tobacco, we grow it ourselves. We gave you cloths because we know you have cloth, but we also have tobacco. We figured that was a fair trade. Like, we're giving useless shit to each other. No. It wasn't done with tobacco necessarily, but just the point is that...
No, but that's a good example.
Yes. Yeah. So the introduction of this indentured Pacific Island labour in the north of Australia had aggravated these tensions because many people felt that this was a cheap alternative just to paying proper wages to white employees. Capitalism, going to do what capitalism does. But rather than blaming the people who were capturing and kidnapping these Pacific Islanders, they blamed the Pacific Islanders for stealing their jobs that they didn't want.
Oh, yeah, it's their fault that they got brought here under false pretenses.
Yeah. So these attitudes led to each colony establishing its own economic and migration policies, some going as far as excluding anyone of non-British descent. White Australia was actually a float that was presented at the Australian Henley Regatta on the Yarra in 1910. So white Australia has always been this very prominent idea with the colonists, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So some of the bulletins that you could read during the era would often say things like, Australia is for the white man. Get coloured men out and white men in. There was a game called the White Australia game. There was a White Australia puzzle. There were white Australian products, songs, pins, badges, soaps, and even a White Australia brand of sliced pineapples in syrup. Mm.
Okay.
Whites are so desperate for culture.
Yep. White apples.
Okay. Yeah. So when Australia federated in 1901, Parliament felt it was necessary to create a national law for immigration. The Immigration Restriction Bill was one of the very first bills to be introduced to the new Parliament and proposed a twofold approach to restricting non-white population growth. The Act came into law on the 23rd of December 1901. So these guys had existed since March of 1901.
Yeah.
And by December, they
And
got a
within
law
6
banning
months-
brown people.
Yeah, within 6 months, it's like, if you don't meet at least Pantone shade this, when you take your shirt off at one of our glorious beaches, if you do not reflect light like the beacons of fucking Gondor, you're not welcome to come to our house party.
If you can't blend in with the sand, what are you even doing here?
Holy fuck. Like, I am keenly aware that other Western countries crib Australia's immigration policy as a model for keeping brown people out. But, like, how deep the rot goes that it was, the second bill they introduced, and it took them 6 months to pass it from the date of federation.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first things they thought about.
Yeah.
Was, how do we keep this place pasty as fuck?
But you think about today, if anyone tried to introduce a bill and have it passed in 6 months, you'd laugh in their face.
Right.
One thing we can all agree on, racism.
Yeah, evidently.
Yeah.
Jesus.
So the Act gave immigration officers the power to make any non-European migrant sit a 50-word dictation test. This was initially given in any European language, and after 1905, in any prescribed language. So this is one of the points about, I always talk about this because it's not the most interesting part, but to me it is the most interesting part about what they did. I know I've mentioned it many, many times, but as the language chosen for the dictation test was at the discretion of the immigration officer, it was easy to ensure failure for migrants deemed undesirable, either because of their country of origin, possible criminal record, medical history, or if considered morally unfit. So you could rock up and tell them that as a person of Asian descent, you knew both French and English, and they could decide to give you the test in Greek to ensure that you would fail.
But then a certain type of Greek person would rock up and they'd give the test in French.
Yes, exactly.
Because that Greek person was too brown.
Yeah. The most famous example was Jewish communist Agon Kitsch, who was fluent in several European languages and was arrested after failing to recite the Lord's Prayer in Scottish Gaelic.
Wow.
Which at the time they were banned from speaking in Scotland.
Yeah, you can tell they're stacking the deck when the only thing they have to rely on is fucking Gaelic. Like, Scots weren't even allowed to speak it.
Scots weren't allowed to speak it at the time.
The English were oppressing them so hard that the Scots weren't allowed to speak their own language. And that's what we chose as the, like, oh yeah, you done fucked up. You can't come into Australia because you can't speak Gaelic. Like,
and this was literally Like the British colony telling him he had to speak Scottish Gaelic while banning the Scots from speaking it at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, yep. God, this country's a fucking nightmare.
The thing that makes me laugh so much, though, about particularly the people of East Asian descent that they blocked, is that you could rock up as a person of East Asian descent and know 3 languages fully and still fail this test. But you could be a white fella
Yep.
from the UK and barely be able to speak English and you'd pass.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild.
We don't want smart people around here. What
No,
would we
no,
do
no,
with them? They'd get so bored.
Smart people would have ideas, and that might like change the country from the white utopia that we have. Why would we want that?
So, extremely small numbers of non-white migrants were ever allowed to pass the test. It was administered 1,359 times prior to 1909. And during this time, only 52 people were allowed to enter Australia. After 1909, not a single migrant made to sit the test passed.
So what you're telling me is at the start of this policy, they were worse at racism.
They got
then
better.
They improved.
Yeah, they improved their racism after 1909, the 100% strike rate. And we wonder why we're such a fucking racist country today. It's like, well, we kept out all the clever non-racist people. So,
yeah.
In 1925, Prime Minister Stanley Bruce reassured a worried public that Australia's racial makeup was still a strong 98% British and that this was unlikely to change. The means of mainstreaming this racial and cultural homogeneity is loosely termed today the White Australia policy. The Immigration Restriction Act in particular never mentions the words white or race, but the parliamentary debates and its application make it clear that it was a tool of racial exclusion. One of the things that we want to remind people whenever we are talking about the law is that judges won't just look at the word of law when they're trying to interpret it. They will also look at things like the second reading speech, which is what is the parliamentarian says when they're delivering the bill to Parliament for the second time, when they know it's already gone through both houses and it's now going through a second time to basically just get the final approval. That second reading speech forms a part of the judge's understanding and interpretation of the document. So a document doesn't have to say anything in it necessarily, but if during the second reading speech someone got up and said the purpose of this document was to ensure that those of non-white descent are not freely able to enter this country, then any bureaucrat, magistrate interpreting that document would take that into account and know that that was the purpose of the document.
Yep.
Bureaucrats also have a lot of power in our society that we all often miss. For example, if bureaucrats had decided that they thought that this was a racist act and they didn't want to put people through it, they had the option not to actually make people sit this test. This wasn't a test that everyone who came here had to sit. This was only given to certain individuals. So it was up to the bureaucrats who were working on a daily basis to ensure that this racist legislation was actually able to work in any sense. So whenever we're talking about law, legal changes, legislative bodies, it's important to remember that there are many moving parts that have to work together in order to see racism work to such a fantastic degree.
There's a lot of effort got to be put in to have racism function.
Absolutely. And the fact that
it can't perpetuate if all of society turns around and goes, hang on a second, that's not fucking right.
Exactly.
You know?
And the fact that 98% of the population was British by 1925 shows how many went along with it in order for that to be the case. Because there was a strong multicultural community here before 1901 that they also had to kill, basically, with these policies. The test actually wasn't dumped until 1958.
Yep. Only 6 years before my mum was born.
Yeah.
Hmm.
As a direct result of the test and how notoriously impossible it was to pass, non-whites largely avoided coming to Australia, and overseas shipping companies did not issue tickets to people likely to fail the test. The White Australia policy received bipartisan support but was gradually dismantled by both sides. Conservative governments introduced the Migration Act in 1958 and in significant modification in 1966.
Look, I need to clarify for chat. I don't find any of this funny. It's just if I don't laugh, I am going to
Yeah.
cry. And I don't feel like being recorded
No.
crying. So
Crying on the internet's
I'm
never a good
going to
idea.
laugh instead. All right? So just for clarity, this is not funny to me.
No, it's not. God, it's not. It's not.
This is an emotional regulation response.
Yeah. Well, this went through another round of changes, obviously. So, driven by the populate or perish doctrine, non-Europeans were allowed to come to Australia based on skills and suitability rather than race. Eventually, they were offered the same pathways to citizenship as Europeans. It was the Whitlam government that decided that they symbolically buried the past remnants of the White Australia policy in 1973 with the Racial Discrimination Act. This was then seen to be tested when there was a large number of Vietnamese refugees that came in under the Fraser government. This was seen as sort of a litmus test as to whether the White Australian policy was really gone in fact, right, like, in actuality. Because while the White Australia policy was made up of sort of these three legal doctrines, there was also this widespread belief that existed within the Australian culture. There are still now the majority of the conversation has been since this time that the White Australia policy is in fact dead. However, since the 70s, there have certainly been a number of occasions in our history that we can point to that suggest that this is not the case. All right, so we're going to get racist again for a sec. You ready?
Phrasing. Jesus Christ. We are all right. Well, it's been lovely having a very brief career. I'll see you on the other side of the cancelled wall. It's been fun. Love yous.
I'm seriously going to snip that out of context and put it up on TikTok later.
It's time for us to get racist
It's time
again.
for us to get
Tamara
racist.
be
You
like,
ready? So
my eyes widening in horror.
So while the White Australia policy might in fact be dead, the White Australia ideology has certainly survived. In 1996, Pauline Hanson became, an actual politician.
Apparently. So they say.
She was elected.
It's alleged.
Like, how did she...
It's alleged.
It's alleged. Voter fraud.
Yeah. Allegedly, Pauline Hanson is a human being. I have yet to see any proof, but allegedly.
We found out how many of our neighbours were racist when they were in the privacy of the voting booth.
Oh, yeah. A big thank you so much to all of you for joining us for this week's dive into the depths of the trash fire that is Australian politics. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, make sure to drop us a follow and do all the usual engagement things to help us get the word out there. You can find Tamara and myself on the social media links in the description below, but for now, it's garbage day, so the girls gotta take the trash out.
Bye.
Bye.